second of tonight's speakers. He'll speak for approximately 40 minutes. Gary.
Thanks, Shelley.
Hi everybody, my name's Gary, I'm an addict. Hi. Good to be here, always good to be at this meeting. Can everybody hear at the back? Yeah, you got me? Okay, yeah, it's nice to be here. I love coming here on a Friday. It kind of, I don't know, I always get excited about Fridays for some reason, you know. This meeting particularly has played a huge part in my recovery over the last few years, and you know, thanks to the committee here, thanks to all the people who get involved with this group, and thanks to the people who don't get involved with this group but just come here and do what we do and sit here and be respectful to the common welfare of the group. You know, it's a big deal. We get like over 100 addicts in here every week, and people are respectful to each other and to the group, and that's a big deal in Narcotics Anonymous. You know, I don't see that happening in many meetings, and it was a big reason why we started this meeting, was because we just got to a stage where we were going, you know, there were 3 of us who were attending another group, and we were just having a tough time of it in that group, you know. Basically, you know, that it got to the stage where there was a business meeting that took place when I was absent from this group, and a couple of people had started coming along to this particular meeting. You know, it was a meeting that we started up in North London, and a couple of people had started coming along there, and they didn't like the way it was done, and they decided they thought they had better ideas for that group than we'd had for it, and they gave me the title of Der Führer. I can't think where they got that idea from, and behind my back, of course, and it got back to me, and we just, you know, in the end we said, you know, rather than start fighting about this, let's just go and start another group. You know, if you don't like what happens in a particular NA meeting, you know, get yourself a kettle and a preamble and go and start another. You know, you don't need a planning permission, you don't need a licence. If you don't like it, just go to another one or start another one. So that's what we did, and you know, and there were 15 of us at the first Trafalgar Square meeting, roughly 15, I wasn't counting, but it was about 15 of us. And you know, we got the chairs on the day, and you know, look at it now. You know, and the irony of this story is that the meeting that we walked away from doesn't exist anymore. It folded. You know, and the infrastructure that was put in place for the service in that group was slowly dismantled. Well, in fact, it wasn't even slowly dismantled, it was quickly dismantled. We don't need business meetings, we'll just figure it out ourselves. Everyone's, yeah, you know, and I witnessed things in that group that I just, you know, towards the end that I just didn't agree with. You know, I got a call one day from the helpline for a 12-step call, and it was a girl, and she was crying her eyes out on the phone. She'd been smoking crack, and I arranged to meet her, and I took her to the meeting, and she sat through the meeting. At the end of the meeting, someone, you know, in the NA related announcements, someone decides to nominate her for the T position. You know, like, and I'm like, what are you doing? And like, before I know it, there's like you know, it's like all in favour and loads of hands go up. She doesn't know how to say no, and it's like, and you know, you've voted somebody that's been using that day into a T position. You know, it'll be good for her. It'll keep her coming back. You know, I don't believe in that stuff. I believe it's got to be good for the common welfare of the group. And you know, we've got to look after the new people. And you know, I know there's some people here tonight who are new to this meeting. Welcome. If you're new to NA, double welcome. You know, and when the people come in here and they're new, it's like you just got to look after them. Not just use them as people that we can offload the service that the people here don't want to do onto. You know, look out for them, protect them, you know, give them a bit of insight, give them a bit of love. Because if you come from what I came from, you know, it was a massive, massive thing for me when I came to my first meeting of Narcotics Anonymous. The only thing I really remember about that meeting is that people told me to keep coming back. But more importantly, it was the first place I felt welcome in a long time. You know, I wasn't welcome anywhere at the end of my addiction. I was a nuisance. It's the best way to describe me. You know, dealers would see me coming towards them and it'd be like, oh, not him again, you know, because they'd know I'd be turning up with a few quid short, with a bag of excuses, and, you know, and So yeah, I love this meeting, and I love the way that it runs. And my grand sponsor, as I say, he says structure brings success. I love Narcotics Anonymous. I got clean in a place where there was one Narcotics Anonymous meeting a week, so I had to go to the Mother Fellowship. And I was resentful to the Mother Fellowship about that for a lot of years, because I felt like I felt aggrieved by them. Do you know what I mean? Because I was just, it was just before my 24th birthday, and I was a drug addict, and it was just full of all these kind of old Scottish guys in Blackpool, and they were just really, really wary of me, and they didn't want me talking about drugs. And and if you tell me not to do something, it makes me want to do it about 100 times more. Do you know what I mean? And so as soon as they told me not to talk about drugs, it just made me want to, I'm Gary, I'm an addict. Oh, sorry about that, and they would be like, frog marching me out of meetings, and I had a lot of conflict with them. But in hindsight, I look back on it now and I think those people just suffered me. They suffered me, and when I got to a stage in my recovery where I could get to enough NA meetings to stay clean on, then, NA became my primary fellowship. But I don't say bad things about other fellowships. If you knock other 12-step fellowships, you need to maybe have a look at that. Because I hear it going on sometimes, and it's kind of like, if you want to knock 12-step fellowships, it's like knocking the Samaritans. Do you know what I mean? It's like, these 12-step fellowships exist to help people change and improve their lives, and they're all pushing a spiritual message, a spiritual solution. I've been clean for a long time now. I got clean, my clean date's September 13th, 1993. And, it's been quite a journey. I'll tell you about my week first. This week, I closed the convention, the West Midlands Convention, last Sunday. And they asked me to speak about the new NA literature. We've got this new book called Living Clean, and it's fabulous. It's really good, because for guys like me who've been around a long time, there's stuff in there that's dedicated to people who've got long-term recovery. Because we talk about the newcomer being the most important person, but sometimes we forget that clean time in itself, and long-term clean time particularly, brings its challenges. And the only people who say clean time doesn't count round here are people who haven't got any. I just tell you that for the record. My clean time counts to me, believe me. I've had to put up with all kinds of things in order to stay in recovery. It counts to me. Staying in the game and not taking that first one. If I'd not taken that first one, I'm in the game, and I'm going to learn some stuff, and I'm going to get some experiences. But they asked me to speak on The Journey Continues, which is the final chapter, and it was kind of ironic, because it was talking about the separation that can occur when you're the longest clean person in every meeting that you go to. And, and I was quite looking forward to talking about it. And I walked in the room and I looked around, and it's 1 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, and there's people there with them huge cans of Monster Energy drink. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's 1 o'clock Sunday afternoon, do you know what I mean? And I'm thinking to myself, if I start trying to tell these guys about when I got candida at 10 years clean and had to go on a macrobiotic diet, I think I'm going to lose half the room, do you know what I mean? So I kind of stayed away from, the stuff I kind of really wanted to talk about, and the irony of the whole thing was I was the longest clean person in the convention, and there were probably only half a dozen people who had over 10 years, and probably about 80% of people in there were in the first 2 years. But what happens, where does everybody go? Because people can sit around and point fingers and go, Mr. NA and all that sort of stuff. But I don't give a monkeys. When I got here, it was my ambition in life not to use again. Someone told me early on, he said, Gary, you've always wanted to be different, now's your chance. Don't use ever again. Because the majority of people who come here do. And it kind of stuck with me, that one, and then on Monday, I come back from the convention, and on Monday I get a call, I got a text, because the Secretary for City Roads was ill and couldn't make it. And that's the real acid test. Do you know what I mean? It's like, well, it's all right getting up there at a convention and speaking in front of loads of people, but as my sponsor says, that feeds the part of my personality that needs to be starved. Going in city roads on a Monday night when it's freezing cold and there's 7 people in there who've not had a night's sleep, who aren't going to laugh at your jokes, who aren't going to laugh at your funny stories because they can't get their eyes off the carpet. It's like, that's the acid test, you know. And so I was in there on Monday, and then I was at a meeting on Tuesday, and down in Earl's Court, a men's meeting, and all of a sudden my stomach I just felt so ill, and I've been kind of ill ever since, to be honest. And today I just had no appetite all day. You know, I had some porridge this morning, and I had to go and do a presentation this afternoon about some work, and I couldn't get out of doing it. It's about a big job, and I kind of forced myself to eat a hummus and beetroot sandwich before the meeting. And this guy made me this drink it was a tea from some Amazonian tree bark or whatever with honey in it. But, you know, I'll try anything, do you know what I mean? And it was actually pretty nice. And I got down here, and since I've been in here, I've just felt the love in the room, you know. You know, Andrew came up to me outside, and when I mentioned I was doing the chair, he said I've made his day. You know, and those little comments mean a lot, you know, it means a lot. And as I said, I'll tell you a bit about how I got here. I should qualify myself, because there's some people here who've never heard my story. Some of you have heard me loads of times. But, you know, I come from a small working class town called Darwin, just outside Blackburn. And I don't recall anything particularly abnormal about my childhood. I've heard it said in Narcotics Anonymous, and I've said it many times myself about I always felt different as a child. The truth of it is, I don't really remember how I felt as a child. I'm quite confused about the whole thing. I used to say that because I heard everybody else saying it, and I wanted to fit in. Yeah. But you know, I don't know that that's necessarily the truth for me. And I think it was around the age of, and you know, all this stuff. It's like a kind of, you know, I don't know. It's like a sort of a Crime Watch reconstruction or something of my life. Do you know what I mean? I have to try, because often I think about it and I try and piece it together and figure it out. And it's, you know, I was. But I think around the age of 12, around the age when I should have been starting puberty, but I didn't start it right away, and so I went into a panic and thought there was something wrong with me, and thought I was weird, and you know, and I was that inwardly focused, do you know what I mean? And so there was all this kind of, you know, fear there, and secrecy, and covering up for myself, and you know, I kind of grew up on red alert, and I hung around with gangs of kids, and you know, and we were pretty cruel to each other, and I, you know, like I say, I was fascinated by drugs before I ever came across them. I remember seeing the heroin campaign in the 80s, and I was about 14, and the images of the guy in that heroin campaign, I was just drawn to it. I was in the health centre, I saw it on the wall, I can handle it, can't I? And I just couldn't take my eyes off it. I was fascinated by it, to a point where I ended up nicking one of them and putting it on my bedroom wall, do you know what I mean? It's like, which I don't think it was designed to have that effect on 14-year-old kids, you know what I mean? But there's something definitely amiss, and yeah, I think that, you know, the first drug I used was alcohol, and you know, I loved the effect it produced. The best way I can describe it was it freed me of me. You know, as a guy who used to sponsor me used to say, he used to call it the nerd remover. You know, it removes the nerdiness. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it gave me something I couldn't give myself. And my life as a teenager was just one big pretense. It was a pretense because I was scared, and I wanted to fit in, and I wanted the approval of my peers and kids who I hung out with, and so I did what they did in order to try and fit in, and I tried to sort of construct a personality for myself based on what I saw other people doing. I didn't really have any tools for living, you know, and you know, I grew up in an household, and it was like that TV show, The Royal Family, you know, but there was no dialogue. You know, and we basically sat around the TV and went to the kettle and back occasionally, and my mum and dad sat there and just chuffed away, and you know, and then like I said, drugs came along, and you know, I didn't have to be asked twice, and the second time I used illegal drugs, I had a needle in my arm, and that's because that's what all the older kids did, and I wanted to fit in, and I wanted to impress them, and I didn't want, and I gritted my teeth and I looked in the opposite direction. And, you know, and drugs in the mid-80s were kind of this very seedy, dark pastime that very undesirable people got involved in. And then come 1988, I've moved to Manchester in the summer of 1988, and this new drug appeared called ecstasy. And everybody, it's like all of a sudden the people that a couple of years earlier had been looking down the nose at me for using temazepam and diconol or whatever, they're all coming up to me in nightclubs kind of sweating and wanting to cuddle me and shake hands and so, you know, like, you know, it's like all of a sudden the estate agents are taking drugs as well. You know, it was like, it became like a hip thing to do, a fashionable thing to do, an acceptable thing to do. And even with that, I was leading kind of a double life because I was using the drugs that weren't acceptable in acid house, but I was kind of doing that behind closed doors, you know. And there was a point in my addiction where I crossed an invisible line. Addiction's a progressive disease. It took me a lot of years of recovery to understand what that means. You know, I would sit in meetings and say, yeah, you know, I started with the soft drugs, you know, I started with a bit of weed and that, and then I got onto the party drugs, and then I got onto the Class A's, and they brought me to my knees, you know, and it's like, and I would think that's progression of addiction, but, you know, it's like, my addiction, my disease does not understand government classification of drugs. It just doesn't, you know, I've seen people that come back from relapses, you know, yeah, you know, I've been on a relapse, but I didn't use any Class A's. It's like, you know, like, I give them a Blue Peter badge or something, you know, it's like, my addiction doesn't differentiate. And at the end of my addiction, you know, I wasn't using very much. I was scrabbling around for £10 bags, you know, I didn't have some huge habit, so it wasn't, but my thirst for drugs got progressively stronger as time went on, and I say I crossed an invisible line, and what I mean by that was after I crossed that invisible line, I don't know where it happened, there was a point in my addiction where it went from being something that I did to fit in and be a part of to being something that was an absolute necessity to do every day. And it completely took over me, and I've learned about this here. I didn't know it was happening at the time it was happening. I just didn't know what was going on at the time it was happening. And you know, and we have a basic text here, and it talks about we know the two things that make up true addiction: obsession and compulsion. And I'll try and keep this really simple. You know, obsession, one thought that overrides all others. The thought of getting and using and finding ways and means to get more was my waking thought in the morning, and that thinking would stay with me all day long, and everything else in my life was a distant second to that. You know, my failed attempts at employment, my girlfriends, it was all a distant second. You know, but, you know, I'm an obsessive guy. I get obsessed with stuff clean, you know, I have an obsessive nature, you know. The real double whammy of addiction for me, and my drug addiction, was the compulsion. I was compelled to use. It was a physical urge beyond my mental control. I could not think my way out of it. I could not negotiate with it. It was so overwhelmingly powerful. The only time it felt like a good idea to get clean was whilst I was stoned. Whilst I was stoned, it was the best idea in the world. Do you know what I mean? And by the next morning, when I opened my eyes, that obsession and that compulsion, that craving was on me. And any thought of getting clean would have completely evaporated, and I would be panicking, thinking, you know, where am I getting money from? Is there anything left from yesterday? You know, who do I owe money to? What happened? You know, it was like this just constant stream of thoughts. And the worst thing about the craving was I'd go out, and once I'd get my money together, you know, I'd be running around sick, and as soon as I get my money, I'd start feeling a bit better right away. Do you know what I mean? I'd think, you know, what the whole fuss was about, you know, and then you know, and then I'd be on my way to score, you know, which invariably meant, you know, going down to Moss Side in an illegal car with, you know, to score drugs off 15-year-old kids on mountain bikes with mobile phones who, you know, I often couldn't count. You know, the people I was buying me drugs off, someone couldn't even count. You know what I mean? And it'd be like, you know, I would get me drugs, and then I would get back home, and the worst thing about it was, I would use to. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'd have used before I got back home. I'd have used when I got to the first car park. Do you know what I mean? Or the first lay-by or wherever. But it's like as soon as I'd use, I would use to kill the craving, and all the using would do is make the craving even stronger. So it's a fallacy, you know, this thing that lives between my ears that tells me, you know, that when I toy with the idea of using, and when I have toyed with the idea of using in my recovery, it never does the trick anyway. You know, so what I you know, I never had the experience of getting myself a 16 for smack, getting a gram into it and thinking, feel just right off this gear now. I think I'll just seal that bag up, pop it in the drawer and leave it till tomorrow because I feel just right off this now. You know, and I know you're laughing because you know what I'm talking about. It just never went like that. The only time I was satisfied was if I was unconscious. You know, and the cravings were such that, you know, by the time I got to that stage in my addiction, I wasn't a very good drug dealer. I don't know if anyone relates to that. I mean, I meet loads of people in NA who, you know, kind of out-crime each other and, you know, the sort of amateur Al Pacinos that you meet, you know what I mean? But I was not a good drug dealer. I'll tell you, I would, you know, I'd get an eight for smack, and we used to have these McDonald's spoons. I heard they banned them now. They're the perfect size for a £10 wrap, and I'd get my McDonald's spoon. And then I get all my wraps ready, and I sit there and I put my personal to the side, and I start getting my wraps sorted out. And of course, my wraps have got to be the best wraps in town. So I want everyone to say, "Oh, he's got top bags, top guy, top deals," you know, because I had that inbuilt need for approval that us addicts have, even before I ever came into recovery. So I put all my, you know, get all my top wraps together, and I put them in the drawer, and I start tucking into my personal. And then, you know, before I know it, my personal's gone. And I sit back and I think to myself, them wraps were a bit big, weren't they? So I go back to the drawer, I get the wraps out, I open every wrap up, I take a bit out of every wrap, I've got a new lot of personal, I reseal them all, back in the drawer with the wraps, and I'm into my next lot of personal. Anyway, before long, guess what happens? All my personal's gone again. I sit back, I think, a couple of them wraps, I took too much out of them. They're not really saleable now. So I go back in looking for which wraps. And then before I know it, I'm scrabbling around with a couple of £10 bags trying to get a score together so I can get on my feet the next day. You know, I was my own best customer. I was not a good drug dealer, you know. And so, but something started to happen. And this ultimately, I think, was the thing that finally brought me into recovery. Was I started to have moments of clarity. And what I mean by that is, I'm not one of those addicts who kind of says, you know, when I'm out there using, I've got no conscience. My problem is I've got too much conscience. And that obsession that drives me on is telling me I've got to go and get and use. But there's something that's coming from deep inside me. There's a knowingness that what I'm doing is not right. It's not what I was supposed to do with my life. It's not what I was destined to do. You know, I would be in certain situations and I'd be looking around and I'm thinking, I'm really not like these people. I'm not like this. How have I ended up in this situation? I do not. But the obsession and the craving was so powerful, I couldn't remove myself. So I'm in conflict internally. Because there's a big part of me that I've got no power against, which is my addiction that's driving me on. But there's another part of me, which I believe is the voice of my conscience, I believe is the voice of my spirit, that's saying, this is not for you. What are you doing? And so those moments of clarity became more and more frequent as my addiction progressed, and it became more and more painful and became harder and harder to make it right what I was doing. It made it harder and harder to justify to myself, and I was running out of people to point fingers at. Where once upon a time it's like, yeah, when I get as bad as him over there, I might think about doing something about myself. I was running out of those people, you know, and at the time I was using, the place I was using, there was no Narcotics Anonymous. It did not exist. You know, there were no examples to prove that it might be possible to live your life without having to use. And, you know, and in Blackburn at that time there was no NA. And all those northern mill towns were absolutely awash with estates, just awash with drugs. You know, awash with social problems and drugs. And, you know, there was no meetings in Preston, there was no meetings in Liverpool, there's no meetings in Burnley, there's no meetings, all these, no, you know, Manchester had some meetings, Blackpool had one meeting. And what happened was I hit bottom. And when I hit bottom, I'd hit a place where I can tell you the stories about shoplifting packs of bacon and joys of coffee and all that kind of stuff, but hitting bottom for me was hitting a place where my ego was sufficiently deflated to be able to ask for help. And, you know, when I say ask for help, I mean on my knees from the pit of my stomach saying, please, I can't, if there's anything up there, I cannot do this any longer. I cannot go on another day living the way I'm living. And within 24 hours of doing that, I was 30 miles up the road near Blackpool in a 12-step treatment facility. And, you know, and it took me 9 years of recovery to make the connection. I asked for help, and in a very short space of time, I was in a treatment facility where they detoxed me and they took me to my first meeting of Narcotics Anonymous. I asked for his help and he sent me where the power is. The power that an addict like me needs against a disease that I've got no power against. And I still haven't got any power against it. It says in Living Clean, it talks about, you know, addiction doesn't have any expiry date. You know, this is about as good as it's getting for people like me. It might not, you know, you might not have what I've got. But, you know, it's like, I got into the groove of this pretty quickly. I resisted a lot of things, you know, I was in a treatment centre, I didn't like the counsellors, I thought they were authority figures, so they were to be rebelled against. You know, and I used to say in NA, I used to say in meetings, I used to say, yeah, I was an ardent atheist when I came here. I don't believe that anymore. I believe I was always seeking something spiritual, but I was just knocking on the wrong doors. You know, the thing with me was, I hated establishments, and to me, God was synonymous with religions. And religions were establishments, and establishments were there to be rebelled against. But, you know, even as a kid, I can think back to, you know, being 7, 8 years old and going out and looking at the sunset from the backyard at my mum's house and watching the sunset, or going out walking in the country and just feeling some sort of magic about it. That's been with me since I was a kid. I think I was seeking something spiritual, but I just, like I say, I was knocking on the wrong doors. I didn't know that at the time. I had no idea of that at the time. And, you know, and then I get clean and my obsession's replaced by my new obsession. You know, I've got the obsession to use drugs, one thought that overrides all others. So that gets replaced with a new obsession, an obsession with myself, one thought that overrides all others. As soon as I get clean and the dust settles on the detox, I just can't stop thinking about myself, constantly. Now, I don't know if anybody in here relates to that, but, you know, it was a never-ending stream of thinking about me. I mean, you know, I think it took me about 10 years of recovery to learn to say, you know, if people come to you and go, how are you doing? I kind of give them like a 15-minute sort of breakdown about what's going on with me, and then it took me about 10 years to learn to say at the end, and how are you? You know, because I'm just so self-absorbed, and that is the root of my problem. I'm completely self-absorbed, self-obsessed, you know. What do I look like? What do I sound like? What's that person think of me? I'll be looking in a mirror in the morning, or no, I've got a spot. You know, I walk in a room, think everybody else is looking at my spot, you know, like, I need an haircut, I look pasty, I've got bags under my eyes, I need sunbed, I need, all these trainers don't look right with these jeans, and like, just constant, you know. I said it on Sunday, the first time I had to pack for a convention, I was going away for 2 days, my bag was about this big, do you know what I mean? It's like, putting everything in there, just in case, do you know what I mean? And I, yeah, completely self-absorbed. And then on top of that, you know, a load of what's the point thinking. You know, I was diagnosed, you know, I was put on antidepressants at the very, you know, probably 15 years old. I was put on antidepressants, you know, and so there's a load of what's the point thinking, a load of kind of fear, a load of feeling unlovable, a load of how am I ever going to meet someone, a load of how am I ever going to get a job. all that stuff, you know, and it's been a long process, and it's taken consistent and persistent effort to change it. You know, where drugs gave me an instant, well, in the early days, they gave me an instant freedom from self. You know, you spend your money, you get free of yourself. We come into recovery, it's like there's only one way I am going to get free of myself, and that's through the program. You know, it's like the thing that I need to treat this addict's addiction is some kind of spiritual experience. And it's took me years and years of recovery to seek that out. You know, and there's something very spiritual that takes place when we come together like this. When we sit together like this, with a shared purpose of recovery, with the best interests of each other at heart. Because out there using, you know, it's like I sometimes hear people in here, they go, yeah, no one in here cares. And you think, try going in my local pub. You're going to find out about people not caring. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I had it the other night. I was speaking to a guy who I've been close with over the years, you know, and he hasn't been going to a lot of meetings of late. And, you know, and he was saying, you know, I've had a lot of trials and tribulations recently, and no one from NA has rung me up. And I was like, do you think of ringing them? Because if you reach out and ask for help in here, there's an abundance of it. There's an absolute abundance of it. And, you know, I needed to find a power. I needed to find a power that was greater than me, in and of myself. Because left to my own devices, I will deceive myself back into taking that first one. And when I take that first one, you know, it's like waltzing with a gorilla. You know, the gorilla decides when the dance ends. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and so, if you're in here right now and you're free of the obsession to use drugs, do everything you can to keep hold of that. You know, do everything you can to keep hold of that, because the ego, my ego, has been doing everything it can to try and rebuild itself since the day I came here. You know, when I was using, you couldn't tell me anything. I knew best on everything, and people would try and tell me, you know, you need to slow down with that stuff. Yeah, whatever. If you carry on with that, it's going to kill you. Yeah, whatever. When I got here, my ego had been deflated, just enough to allow other people in. And as time went on, you know, my first surrender, I don't believe I surrendered. I believe my addiction surrendered me. My life wasn't just unmanageable, it was absolutely unbearable. But, you know, as time went on in recovery, my ego started to rebuild itself. And my ego, it's got such a subtle way of operating, I don't even see that it's happening. And two of the ways it loves to work is to either make me superior to you or inferior to you. Because if it can do either of those things, it can separate me from you. And the crux of how this whole thing works for me is the power of identification. You know, I had a sponsor who rang me the other morning, and he must have 18 years clean, you know, and he was telling me about, you know, a disagreement he'd had with his wife the night before. And I couldn't say to him, well, go and read page 80 in the basic text. All I could do was talk to him about disagreements I've had with my wife. And the identification was enough. He didn't need any kind of directing. He just needed some identification. And that, you know, that in itself is enough. But in order to get the identification, in order to get, you know, the power that we have of sharing here, the absolute prerequisite, most important thing that we need to do that is the honesty. If we haven't got the principle of honesty in there, then we're kind of wasting our breath. You know, and it took me, you know, I forget just how long it took me to learn that every day, get on the phone or get around another addict and tell them honestly where you're at. And that's something I've done ever since I came here. But as I said, you know, the ego's trying to rebuild itself. And, you know, by the time I got to about 2 years clean, the ego has, you know, it's separated me. I'm coming to meetings, I'm looking around the room, I'm thinking, I'm not like this lot. I won't even use with these people. Never mind recover with them, you know. And I'm putting myself on the outside again, and I end up, you know, because no one comes in here and thinks like that looks exciting. You know, the 12 steps, you're having a joke, aren't you? You know, what do I want to do that for? I just don't want to take drugs anymore. But at 2 years, it's like I realised that if I didn't do something dramatic, I was going to be, you know, I wasn't going to stay for the long haul. Because I felt like, you know, I'd been given some sort of like, I was 24 years old, I felt like I'd been given a 50-year sentence with no drugs and alcohol. You know, I was looking at people who coming in the 40s and thinking, he got 20 years more using than I got, you know, and like envious of them. That's how kind of back to front it was. But, you know, I hit a bottom around 2 years and I got a sponsor and I've been sponsored ever since. And I do everything I can to remain sponsorable and to remain active. And my sponsor's got 34 years and his sponsor's got 54 years. And he tells me the stories about, you know, the people who've gone after 25 years. He tells me stories about when he was in detox and a guy walked in who'd had 43 years sober and had picked a drink up. You know, he tells me those stories. So I don't think I'm out of the woods here because I got 19 years clean. I don't think I'm out of the woods by any means. That's why I come here regularly. You know, I'm one of those addicts, I go very off-key very quickly. But, you know, I've had to re-surrender. I had to re-surrender about 5.5 years. I had to do a 90 and 90 at 5.5 years and do another 5th step. At 9 years, I went and got some outside help. You know, and I've done innumerable things throughout my recovery to try and enhance the quality of life that I have in recovery. You know, I went and got a degree, I got a career, I've travelled the world, I've done that sort of stuff, I got married. But, you know, recovery's had its challenges. You know, my wife at the moment, she's got a brain tumour, she's 14 years clean. She's got a lot of distress with that, she's got a lot of fear with that. And being as self-centred as I am, when she's not 100%, you know, I come home and she's not smiley and happy and I think it's got something to do with me. You know, or you know, my mum had a breakdown about 9 years ago, she's been sectioned several times. You know, recovery brings its challenges. You know, a couple of years ago I discovered, you know, they found some cancerous skin on my stomach, had to be cut out. Stuff, you know, stuff happens. But what this does, by coming here and being authentic, it enables me to face those things and walk through those things without having to take that first one. And you know, around 10 years clean, I changed my diet because I you know, the first 10 years of recovery, I just, you know, the amount of caffeine I was putting inside myself, no wonder I had a racing brain, do you know what I mean? And I started to eat better, you know, and then I started to put a pen to paper regularly, most days, and do a step 10 because I've been putting that off because I thought that's for people who are later in recovery, and then all of a sudden I am later in recovery and I'm still not doing it. You know, around 16 years clean, I started to get interested in meditation. I've been meditating a lot more, and it's been, you know, I tried meditating when I was about 3 years clean. It was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my entire life, do you know what I mean? And but I hadn't been through the steps. I hadn't done the necessary stuff. You know, I hadn't freed myself of those resentments, you know, because I am murder with a resentment. Thank God I have a program to deal with that now because, you know, earlier in my recovery, I mean, I can't begin to tell you, I'll tell you a story very quickly. That meeting that I walked away from to come to this meeting, the personalities in that meeting that drove us out of there, as I would say, whoa, the resentment. Anyone that even went to that meeting was like a potential contender for a bit of resentment, you know, because when I get resentment to one person in NA, then all of a sudden it's like I resent their friends as well. It's like, if it's left unchecked, it becomes about their friends, you know, and then it becomes about people that go to their home group. You know, I honestly, in my ego, think that because I stopped going to that meeting, everyone else should stop as well. They should all come out in sympathy, do you know what I mean? It's like scabs, do you know what I mean? They carry on going there, you know. It's like, you know, I would see, there was one particular woman, I would see her at conventions and we'd like walk, we'd make a point, it was like handbags at dawn, do you know what I mean? We'll look the opposite direction as we pass each other in the corridor, you know, and her name came up on my step 10s again and again and again and again, and I did a 5th step when I was about 15 years clean. And I said to my sponsor, I said, you know, most of these resentments, I get free of my prey on it and I get free of them. And he said, and my sponsor said, and I said, but there's some of them that just really stick. He said, yeah, it's because you need to make amends to the people you resent. What? Hang on a minute. Because, you know, I'm very good at getting to the exact nature of their wrongs, not my wrongs, you know. And I had to go back to this lady and tell her I'd been completely inconsiderate and that I couldn't even remember what I really resented her for anymore. And that it had all been, it was all ridiculous, you know, and that there'd been times in our recovery where we'd shared some good times together. And she made amends to me. We mended what had been broken. And I see her now and there's absolutely no weirdness. You know when you go in a meeting and someone there you've had a problem with and all of a sudden the energy feels a bit funky on you and you're like, do I share, do I not? It's like, that's gone, do you know what I mean? Free of it. You know, and I love being a part of this. I'm running out of time now. I have spiritual experiences in my recovery. I do not think in the same way that I can think in the same way that I used to think. My reaction to life is very different. On a bad day, it can be as bad as it ever was. But something shifted. Things that I used to think were really important don't seem as important anymore. You know, and I put a lot of emphasis on things that aren't necessarily visible. And, you know, the things that really matter to me are things like the friendships that I have. You know, and the love that I have in my life, the people that I care about, you know, being a good father to my son, you know, I'll tell you this last story. When I was leaving treatment, they played a song, and I told this story on Sunday actually, so Darren, you'll have to listen again, and you, Shelley. But they played this song. When I was leaving rehab, they used to choose a song for you, which I thought was the cheesiest thing on earth, do you know what I mean? And they played this song, and it was that, Lean on Me, you know, that tune, and you listen to the lyrics of that song and it's like very, very spiritual song, and they played it and I was like person most likely to fail in treatment, and you know, and I came out the other side and they were all telling me how wonderful I was and all the rest of it, and they played this song and you know, I walked out there and 5 minutes after walking out the desire to use came right back on me, but that's another story. But they played this song and that song has a really odd habit of appearing at times in my life when I'm not expecting it. So, you know, 12 years clean, I was in New York. I was working on New York Fashion Week. I was organising celebrity attendees to sit on the front row of this big fashion show. And it was quite stressful. And I'd been to a morning meeting and I'd met this guy and we kind of clicked. And he'd give me his number and I called him and I said, look, I'm working on this big fashion show tomorrow. Can you take me to a meeting? He texted me to a meeting in Brooklyn, and it was a proper ghetto fabulous meeting, right? But it's like you had to go for a metal detector to get into the meeting. You know, it was like, you know how we say leave your drugs and paraphernalia outside? It was like leave your drugs, paraphernalia and guns outside, you know. It was like, and I go in there and there's me and we're the only two white guys in the meeting, you know what I mean? And I get up for my keyring, 12 years clean, and I say, I'm Gary Maddox, visiting from England, 12 years clean, and the place went nuts. They're all up on their feet, whooping and clapping, and I come out there and I'm walking up the sidewalk in Brooklyn, and I just had this moment of clarity. I just thought, how have I ended up here? Coming from where I come from, that addict with the heavy conscience running around shoplifting, you know, who still has that heavy conscience, who needs a programme to handle that heavy conscience. How do I end up here getting a round of applause from these people I've never even met before? And I go down into the subway and there's a busker there and he's going, lean on me. And it was just one of those moments, and it was magical. And to someone who's cynical, you probably think, yeah, coincidence. Think what you want. I felt it. You know, a few years after that, I'm in Durban. I'm closing the South African National Convention, and you know, and we're staying in this Zulu village called Do Do Do, and I'm there carrying the message, you know, and I end up and I finish giving my talk, and I get down and we link hands to do the prayer, and they say, and the DJ puts a song on before you, and lean on me, and it's like these moments in my recovery, it's like it appears, do you know what I mean? And I have lots of those kind of experiences, you know, and I love the synchronicity of it. I love being here. Like I said, thanks to everybody who's here tonight. Thanks to everybody who's made this meeting what it is over the years. Long may it continue. God bless you all. Thank you.